I'll read this poem. This is a good example, maybe, of that. It's the title poem of this book, The Trouble with Poetry. And this finds some place to land, and reminiscent sort of this bookstore. The trouble with poetry. The trouble with poetry, I realized as I walked along a beach one night, cold Florida sand under my bare feet, a show of stars in the sky. The trouble with poetry is that it encourages the writing of more poetry, more guppies crowding the fish tank, more baby rabbits hopping it of their mothers into the dewy grass. And how will it ever end unless the day finally arrives when we have compared everything in the world to everything else in the world, and there is nothing left to do then but quietly close our notebooks and sit with our hands folded on our desks. Poetry fills me with joy, and I rise like a feather in the wind. Poetry fills me with sorrow, and I sink like a chain flung from a bridge. But mostly, poetry fills me with the urge to write poetry, to sit in the dark and wait for a little flame to appear at the tip of my pencil. And along with that, the longing to steal, to break into the poems of others with a flashlight and a ski mask. And what an unmarried band of thieves we are. Cut purses, common shoplifters, I thought to myself, as a cold wave swirled around my feet, and the lighthouse moved its megaphone over the sea, which is an image I stole directly from Lawrence Ferlinghetti. To be perfectly honest for a moment, the bicycling poet of San Francisco, whose little amusement park of a book I used to carry in a side pocket of my uniform up and down the treacherous halls of high school. Thank you. So that was there was the hair, and then there was Ferlinghetti. So as soon as he appeared, because I did copy that line down. I thought it was amazing to think of the lighthouse as kind of a luminous megaphone, silently, tracing over the sea, like the Heather McHugh's description of fishing or kite flying is upside down fishing. So the string is going up instead of down. And some of these images just stop you in your tracks. There's an amazing image I wrote down the other day by Marcia Norman. These are kind of engraved images. That's like woodcutting class or something. But it was one of her plays. The wife loses her husband. The husband dies. And she is back at her house a day or two after the funeral, and she's sitting out by the swimming pool and thinking about her husband, obviously, and she notices on the surface of the pool there's a beach ball which is just kind of being blown a little back and forth by the breeze, and she realizes that the beach ball is filled with the breath of her dead husband. It just stops you, and then you don't even. You have to stop reading for a minute to recover. This is another poem that involves lifting lines. And in this case, I took two lines, not just out of the middle of a poem, but actually took the first two lines of someone else's poem and essentially rewrote the poem for him. This is a professional courtesy. So I just came across this poem in a magazine that it's a love poem, and it just seemed to suffer from a very outdated theory about how to approach women in poetry that male poets were laboring under. The assumption was that what women really wanted more than anything in life was not loyalty or passion or fidelity or respect. They just wanted similes. They just wanted to be compared to stuff. So this is, it starts sort of in the Italian Middle Ages with these sonnet comparisons, and so even though Shakespeare tries to end it, when he says, "My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun," no one heard that apparently, and particularly this contemporary poet who wrote a poem of maybe 50 lines just of wheel spinning comparisons. So he begins his poem, and I begin the same way. Looking at the beloved, apparently, he says to her, "You are the bread and the knife, the crystal goblet and the wine." Litany. You are the bread and the knife, the crystal goblet and the wine. You are the dew on the morning grass and the burning wheel of the sun. You are the white apron of the baker and the marsh birds suddenly in flight. However, you are not the wind in the orchard, the plums on the counter, or the house of cards. And you are certainly not the pine-scented air. There is no way you are the pine-scented air. It is possible that you are the fish under the bridge, maybe even the pigeon on the general's head, but you are not even close to being the field of cornflowers at dusk. And a quick look in the mirror will show that you are neither the boots in the corner nor the boat asleep in its boathouse. It might interest you to know, speaking of the plentiful imagery of the world, that I am the sound of rain on the roof. I also happen to be the shooting star, the evening paper blowing down an alley, and the basket of chestnuts on the kitchen table. I am also the moon in the trees and the blind woman's teacup. But don't worry, I am not the bread and the knife. You are still the bread and the knife. You will always be the bread and the knife, not to mention the crystal goblet and somehow the wine. Thank you very much. This is a poem kind of about the habitual, what I take to be some of the habits that poets have. I came across a quote after, or a line from Flannery O'Connor, well after I'd written the poem, which seems to fit. She said, "A writer should never be ashamed of staring. There is nothing that does not require attention." And because the poem is just about the habitual habits of poets, it's called Monday. The birds are in their trees, the toast is in the toaster, and the poets are at their windows. They are at their windows in every section of the tangerine of earth, the Chinese poets looking up at the moon, the American poets gazing out at the pink and blue ribbons of sunrise. The clerks are at their desks, the miners are down in their mines, and the poets are looking out their windows, maybe with a cigarette, a cup of tea, and maybe a flannel shirt or a bathrobe is involved. The proofreaders are playing the ping-pong game of proofreading, glancing back and forth from page to page. The chefs are dicing celery and potatoes, and the poets are at their windows, because it is their job, for which they are paid nothing every Friday afternoon. Which window it hardly seems to matter, though many have a favorite, for there is always something to see, a bird grasping a thin branch, the headlights of a taxi rounding a corner, those two boys in wool caps angling across the street. The fishermen bob in their boats, the linemen climb their round poles, the barbers wait by their mirrors and chairs, and the poets continue to stare at the cracked bird bath or a limb knocked down by the wind. By now it should go without saying that what the oven is to the baker and the berry-stained blouse to the dry cleaner, so the window is to the poet. Just think, before the invention of the window, the poets would have to put on a jacket and a winter hat to go outside, or remain indoors with only a wall to stare at. And when I say a wall, I do not mean a wall with striped wallpaper and a sketch of a cow in a frame. I mean a cold wall of fieldstones, the wall of the medieval sonnet, the original woman's heart of stone, the stone caught in the throat of her poet lover.
Oh.